The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Lincoln High School as Marcus Williams stepped out of his old Honda Civic. He took a deep breath of the cool air and looked up at the three-story brick building that would be his workplace for the next few months. At 58 years old, Marcus had seen many changes in his life, but this was perhaps the biggest one yet. After 30 years of living a completely different life, he was now going to be a substitute history teacher. Marcus walked slowly toward the main entrance, carrying only a worn brown leather briefcase that had been with him for over 2 decades. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, and his dark skin showed the lines of someone who had lived through many experiences. He wore a simple blue button-down shirt and black dress pants, nothing fancy or expensive. To anyone watching, he looked like just another middle-aged man starting a new job. They had no idea what kind of man was really walking through their doors. The security guard at the front desk barely looked up as Marcus signed in and received his visitor badge. The hallways were already filling with students rushing to their first period classes. Marcus noticed how some of the kids looked at him with curious eyes. He was used to people staring, but for different reasons than they might expect. In his previous life, people stared because they knew his reputation. Here they stared because he was new and different. Principal Johnson met Marcus in the main office and quickly went through the basic information he would need. She seemed rushed and distracted as she handed him a stack of papers and a key to classroom 205. She explained that the regular history teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was out sick and might be gone for several weeks. Marcus would be teaching American history to juniors and seniors. The principal warned him that some of the students could be challenging, but she said it in a way that suggested she had given up on really controlling them. As Marcus walked up the stairs to the second floor, he passed groups of students who were talking loudly and acting like they owned the hallways. Some teachers stood by their doors looking tired and defeated. He could sense the atmosphere of a school where discipline had broken down and respect was hard to find. It reminded him of some of the rougher places he had been in his younger days, when he was still fighting and training others to fight. Classroom 205 was at the end of a long hallway. Marcus unlocked the door and stepped inside to find a typical high school classroom with 30 desks arranged in rows facing a whiteboard. Posters about American history covered the walls, and there was a large American flag hanging in the corner. Everything looked normal and peaceful, but Marcus had learned long ago that appearances could be very deceiving. He set his briefcase on the teacher desk and began organizing the lesson plans that Mrs. Patterson had left behind. As he read through them, he could tell she was a good teacher who cared about her students. The plans were detailed and thoughtful, showing someone who had put real effort into helping kids learn. Marcus hoped he could do justice to her work, even though his own background was so different from hers. The first bell rang and students began filtering into the classroom. Marcus watched each one carefully as they entered. This was an old habit from his previous life, where knowing who was in the room and what they might do could mean the difference between safety and danger. Most of the students looked like typical teenagers, but a few caught his attention. There was something in their body language that suggested they might be the type who caused problems for substitute teachers. Marcus had heard the stories about how some students treated substitutes. They saw them as easy targets, people who did not know the rules and could be pushed around without consequences. What these students did not know was that Marcus Williams had spent decades dealing with people who were much more dangerous than any high school bully. He had faced men with knives, guns, and years of street fighting experience. He had trained soldiers and police officers and had earned respect in places where respect was not given lightly. But those days were behind him now. At least that is what he told himself as he prepared to meet his first class. Marcus had come to Lincoln High School looking for a peaceful way to spend his later years. He wanted to help young people learn about history and maybe make a positive difference in their lives. He had no way of knowing that very soon his peaceful retirement would be interrupted by a confrontation that would test every skill he had learned in his previous life. Tyler Jensen woke up that Monday morning with his usual attitude of not caring about anything or anyone. At 17 years old, he had already built a reputation that made grown adults nervous. Standing 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms, Covered in tattoos that clearly violated every school rule, Tyler looked more like a street fighter than a high school student. His blonde hair was always messy, and his blue eyes held a cold look that warned people to stay away from him. The Jensen family lived in the richest part of town in a mansion that cost more than most people would make in their entire lives. Tyler's father was a successful lawyer who specialized in getting wealthy people out of legal trouble. His mother spent her days shopping and attending charity events where she could show off her expensive clothes and jewelry. Neither parent had much time for their son, except when he got into trouble, and they needed to hire lawyers to clean up his mess. Tyler had been causing problems at Lincoln High School since his freshman year. In just 3 years, he had been suspended 12 times for fighting with other students, threatening teachers, and selling drugs in the school bathrooms. Each time, his parents would hire expensive lawyers who would find ways to get the charges dropped or reduced. The school administration had tried everything they could think of, but nothing seemed to work. Tyler always came back angrier and more defiant than before. Other students at Lincoln High were genuinely afraid of Tyler Jensen. He had sent 3 kids to the hospital with broken bones and had threatened dozens more. The hallways would go quiet when he walked by, and students would quickly look away to avoid making eye contact. Even the older seniors who thought they were tough would step aside when Tyler approached. He enjoyed the fear he caused and used it to get whatever he wanted. The teachers at Lincoln High had their own way of dealing with Tyler. Most of them had learned to ignore his behavior as much as possible. They would look the other way when he came to class late or when he disrupted their lessons. Some teachers had even requested transfers to other schools just to get away from him. The few brave teachers who tried to discipline Tyler quickly learned that his parents would make their lives miserable with complaints to the school board and threats of lawsuits. Even the security guards at Lincoln High were careful around Tyler. The head of security had been warned by the principal that the Jensen family had connections with important people in the city government. Any security guard who was too rough with Tyler would quickly find himself looking for a new job. So they mostly watched from a distance and only got involved if someone was in serious danger of being hurt. Tyler's criminal activities went far beyond just school trouble. The local police knew him well from reports of vandalism, theft, and assault. But every time they tried to build a case against him, the charges would mysteriously disappear or witnesses would suddenly change their stories. Tyler had learned that money and power could solve almost any problem, and he used this knowledge to do whatever he wanted without fear of consequences. On this particular Monday morning, Tyler was especially angry about having to go to school. He had been suspended for the past week after getting into a fight with a smaller student who had accidentally bumped into him in the cafeteria. His parents had finally managed to get him readmitted, but Tyler was looking for someone to take his frustration out on. As he drove his expensive sports car into the school parking lot, Tyler was already planning his day. He had heard through the usual gossip network that there was a new substitute teacher in Mrs. Patterson's history class. Tyler smiled to himself as he thought about how much fun it would be to break in another substitute. In his experience, substitute teachers were the easiest targets. They did not know the school rules, they were afraid to call for help, and they usually just wanted to get through the day without any trouble. Tyler had no way of knowing that this substitute teacher was unlike anyone he had ever encountered before. He was about to learn that some people could not be intimidated by money, power, or threats. But for now, Tyler Jensen walked toward Lincoln High School thinking he was still the most dangerous person in the building. The third period bell had already rung 10 minutes ago when the classroom door burst open with a loud bang. Every student in Marcus Williams' American history class turned to look as Tyler Jensen strutted through the entrance like he owned the entire school. His heavy boots made deliberate loud sounds on the floor as he walked, and his presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room from calm learning to tense fear. Marcus continued writing on the whiteboard about the civil rights movement, but his trained senses were already fully alert. Without turning around, he could hear exactly where Tyler was moving and could sense the shift in energy from the other students. Years of combat training had taught him to be aware of everything happening around him, even when he appeared to be focused on something else. His hand remained steady as he wrote, but every muscle in his body was now prepared for whatever might come next. Tyler threw his heavy backpack across the room where it crashed into a desk and knocked several books to the floor. The sound echoed through the classroom like a gunshot and made several students jump in their seats. He then deliberately kicked over an empty chair, sending it sliding across the floor until it hit the wall with another loud bang. Still, Marcus did not turn around or react in any way that Tyler could see. Finding an empty seat in the back corner, Tyler plopped down heavily and put his feet up on the desk in front of him. He began making loud comments about how boring history was and how he did not have to listen to any substitute teacher tell him what to do. His voice carried clearly through the classroom, and every word was designed to challenge Marcus's authority and disrupt the lesson that was in progress. The other students sat frozen in their seats, unsure whether to watch the confrontation or try to pretend nothing was happening. Marcus finally turned around to face the class, and his eyes briefly met Tyler's across the room. For just a moment, Tyler saw something in those calm brown eyes that made him pause, but he quickly pushed the feeling aside. This was just another substitute teacher, and Tyler had broken dozens of them before. He leaned back in his chair and gave Marcus the kind of cold stare that had intimidated countless adults throughout his young life. The other students in the classroom knew exactly what was happening because they had seen it many times before. Tyler Jensen was establishing his dominance over another substitute teacher and testing to see how far he could push before getting any kind of response. Most substitutes would either get angry and start yelling, which never worked, or they would try to ignore Tyler completely, which also never worked. Either way, Tyler always won these battles, and the substitute would leave at the end of the day looking defeated and exhausted. But Marcus Williams was not like other substitute teachers. He calmly set down his marker and walked to the center of the classroom, where he could see all of his students clearly. His movements were smooth and controlled, showing none of the nervousness or anger that Tyler was expecting to see. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but somehow it carried to every corner of the room with perfect clarity. Marcus began talking about courage during the civil rights era and how ordinary people had found the strength to stand up against bullies and oppressors who seemed much more powerful than they were. He talked about Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat and Martin Luther King facing down angry mobs who wanted to hurt him. As he spoke, several students began to sit up straighter, realizing that this lesson was about much more than just history. Tyler became increasingly frustrated as his usual tactics failed to get any reaction from Marcus. The substitute teacher was not getting angry or showing fear like all the others had done. Instead, he was actually making Tyler look foolish by simply ignoring his behavior and continuing to teach. This was not how these confrontations were supposed to go, and Tyler could feel this control of the situation slipping away. The tension in the classroom continued to build as Tyler realized he would have to escalate his behavior to get the reaction he wanted. He had never met an adult who could not be intimidated, and he was not about to let some old substitute teacher be the first. Tyler had no idea that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his young life. Tyler Jensen had reached his breaking point with the substitute teacher, who refused to show him the fear and respect he demanded. His face was turning red with anger as he realized that his usual intimidation tactics were not working on Marcus Williams. Every other adult in his life had eventually given in to his threats and aggressive behavior, but this old man was different. Tyler could not understand why Marcus was not scared of him, and this confusion only made his anger grow stronger. Standing up from his desk with dramatic force, Tyler knocked over his chair and let it crash to the floor behind him. The sound echoed through the classroom like thunder, and several students flinched at the noise. Tyler began walking slowly toward the front of the room, where Marcus was still standing calmly near the whiteboard. His heavy boots made threatening sounds on the floor with each step, and his hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides. As Tyler moved closer to Marcus, he began using words that made the other students gasp and look away in shock. He called Marcus names that were meant to hurt and humiliate him because of his race and age. Tyler had learned that these particular words usually made adults very angry or very scared, and either reaction would give him the control he wanted. But Marcus just stood there listening without showing any emotion on his face. His breathing remained steady and his posture stayed relaxed even as Tyler got closer and closer. The other students in the classroom were now pulling out their phones to record what they expected would be another humiliating defeat of a substitute teacher by Tyler Jensen. They had seen this happen before, and they knew how it usually ended. The substitute would either run out of the room to get help, or they would start yelling and lose all control of the class. Either way, Tyler would win and the story would spread throughout the school within hours. But something was different this time, and a few of the smarter students were beginning to notice it. Marcus Williams was not reacting like other adults did when Tyler threatened them. Instead of backing away or getting angry, Marcus seemed to be getting more focused and alert. His eyes were tracking Tyler's movements with the precision of someone who had dealt with dangerous people before. There was something about his stillness that felt more like a coiled spring than fear or weakness. Tyler reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a switchblade knife that he always carried with him. The blade was 4 inches long and razor sharp, and it gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the classroom. He held it casually, at first flipping it open and closed while making increasingly violent threats about what he would do to teachers who did not show him proper respect. The metallic clicking sound of the blade opening and closing filled the now completely silent classroom. Several students near the door began quietly moving toward the exit, but they were afraid to make any sudden movements that might attract Tyler's attention. The smart ones were already texting their friends and family to let them know what was happening. Some were even calling 911 on their phones while trying to stay hidden behind their desks. Everyone in the room understood that this situation had just become much more dangerous than anyone had expected. Marcus Williams felt his body automatically shift into a different mode as soon as he saw the weapon. Decades of martial arts training and real-world combat experience kicked in without him having to think about it. His breathing became deeper and more controlled, his muscles tensed slightly, and his mind began calculating distances, angles, and possible responses. But on the outside, he still looked calm and unafraid, which only made Tyler more frustrated and confused. Tyler had never met anyone who did not show fear when he pulled out his knife. The weapon had always been his ultimate trump card, the thing that made even the toughest adults back down and do whatever he wanted. But this substitute teacher was still just standing there, looking at him with those steady brown eyes that seemed to see right through him. Tyler realized he would have to do something more dramatic to get the reaction he wanted. Tyler Jensen stepped forward until he was less than 3 feet away from Marcus Williams, with the switchblade knife held out in front of him like a weapon of war. The sharp metal blade caught the light from the classroom windows and seemed to glow with dangerous intent. Tyler's breathing was heavy and his eyes were wild with the kind of rage that comes from never being told no by anyone in his entire life. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and everyone in the room knew that something terrible was about to happen. The other students in the classroom were now completely silent and frozen in their seats like statues. Some had their phones out recording everything, while others were too scared to move at all. A few were crying quietly, and several were texting their parents to tell them they loved them, just in case this was the last message they would ever send. The air in the room felt thick and heavy, like the moments before a violent thunderstorm breaks open and destroys everything in its path. Tyler brought the knife up until it was just inches away from Marcus's face and began making his final demands. He wanted Marcus to get down on his knees in front of the entire class and apologize for disrespecting him. He wanted Marcus to admit that Tyler was the one in control and that he was just a weak old man who could not fight back. Tyler's voice was shaking with anger as he made these demands, and spit was flying from his mouth as he spoke louder and louder. Marcus Williams looked directly into Tyler's eyes, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he spoke in a voice that was quiet but somehow filled the entire room. He told Tyler that this was his last chance to put the knife away and walk out of the classroom before something happened that could not be taken back. There was something in Marcus's tone that was different from anything Tyler had ever heard before. It was not fear or anger, but something much more dangerous. It was the voice of someone who had faced real violence and was prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect himself and his students. For just a moment, Tyler hesitated as something deep in his brain recognized that he might be making a serious mistake. But his pride and anger were too strong, and he had gone too far to back down now. He pressed the knife closer to Marcus's face and screamed that he was going to cut the old man if he did not do exactly what Tyler demanded. The blade was now so close that Marcus could feel the cold metal almost touching his skin. Then everything changed in less than 2 seconds. Marcus Williams moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for a man of his age. His right hand shot out like lightning and struck Tyler's wrist at exactly the right spot to instantly paralyze his grip on the knife. The weapon fell from Tyler's suddenly useless fingers and clattered harmlessly to the floor with a metallic sound that seemed to echo forever in the silent classroom. Tyler stared down at his hand in complete shock and confusion, unable to understand what had just happened to him. Before Tyler could even begin to process what was happening, Marcus had moved around him with fluid grace and was now standing directly behind the teenager. Tyler tried to turn around but found that he could not move properly because Marcus had applied pressure to specific points on his neck and shoulder, controlled his ability to coordinate his movements. It was like being trapped in his own body while someone else controlled what he could and could not do. The students in the classroom watched in amazement as their substitute teacher demonstrated skills that none of them had ever seen before outside of action movies. Marcus was controlling Tyler's much larger and stronger body with what looked like gentle touches, but Tyler was completely helpless to resist or fight back. His arms hung limply at his sides, and his legs would only move in the directions that Marcus allowed them to move. Tyler tried to speak, but found that even his voice was not working properly. He could only make weak, gasping sounds as he struggled to understand how a man who looked like a mild-mannered history teacher had just disabled him so completely and so quickly. The knife that had been his source of power and fear was now lying on the floor forgotten, while Tyler himself had become as helpless as a small child. Marcus guided Tyler to an empty chair and gently but firmly made him sit down. Tyler found that he had no choice but to comply with whatever Marcus wanted him to do. For the first time in his life, Tyler Jensen was completely powerless and at the mercy of someone else. The bully who had terrorized an entire school for years was now just a confused and frightened teenager who had finally met someone he could not intimidate or control. With Tyler Jensen now sitting helplessly in the chair, unable to move or cause any more trouble, Marcus Williams stood in front of him and began to speak in a calm, clear voice that carried to every corner of the classroom. For the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus was ready to reveal who he really was and why Tyler had made such a terrible mistake in choosing him as a target. The other students leaned forward in their seats, sensing that they were about to hear something extraordinary. Marcus explained that his name was indeed Marcus Williams, but that was not the only name he was known by in certain circles around the country. For the past 30 years, he had also been known as Grandmaster Williams, a title that was earned through decades of dedication to multiple martial arts disciplines. He had started training when he was just 12 years old and had never stopped learning and improving his skills even now in his late 50s. The students listened in amazement as Marcus listed the different fighting styles he had mastered over the years. He held black belts in 6 different martial arts, including karate, judo, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and several others that most people had never even heard of. He had trained under some of the greatest masters in the world, traveling to Japan, China, and Thailand to learn from the best teachers money could find. His knowledge of pressure points, joint locks, and defensive techniques was so advanced that he could disable an opponent without causing permanent injury. Tyler tried to speak, but his voice still was not working properly due to the pressure points that Marcus had activated. He could only sit there and listen as the substitute teacher revealed a background that sounded like something from a martial arts movie. Tyler's mind was racing as he tried to understand how he had been so completely wrong about the quiet man he had thought would be an easy target. Marcus continued his explanation by telling the class about some of the work he had done over the years. He had been hired by the United States military to train Navy SEALs and other special forces soldiers in hand-to-hand combat techniques. He had taught self-defense classes to police officers, FBI agents, and federal marshals. He had worked as a bodyguard for important government officials and business leaders who needed protection from dangerous people. The most shocking revelation came when Marcus explained that he had once been part of an underground fighting circuit where the best martial artists from around the world would compete in matches that were not regulated by any official organization. These fights were serious and dangerous, with few rules and high stakes. Marcus had never lost a single match in over 100 fights and had earned a reputation as one of the most skilled and dangerous fighters in the world. But Marcus also explained that he had left that world behind many years ago when he realized that fighting for money and reputation was not making him happy or fulfilled. He had decided to use his skills to teach and protect others rather than to hurt people or show off his abilities. That was why he had become a substitute teacher, hoping to make a positive difference in the lives of young people who needed guidance and education. As Marcus spoke, Tyler began to understand just how badly he had misjudged the situation. He had thought he was threatening a weak old man who would be afraid of him and his knife. Instead, he had pulled a weapon on someone who had faced much more dangerous opponents than Tyler could ever imagine. Men with guns, military training, and years of combat experience had all been defeated by Marcus Williams, and Tyler was just a spoiled teenager with a switchblade. The other students in the classroom were recording everything on their phones, and they knew that this video would spread throughout the school and beyond within hours. They were witnessing something that would become legendary at Lincoln High School, the day that Tyler Jensen finally met someone who could not be intimidated or bullied. The substitute teacher, who had seemed so ordinary and mild-mannered, had turned out to be one of the most dangerous men any of them would ever meet. Marcus looked down at Tyler with eyes that showed both disappointment and understanding. He explained that Tyler had talent and intelligence, but was wasting both on bullying people who could not fight back. Real strength, Marcus said, came from protecting others and using power responsibly, not from hurting people who were weaker or smaller. Tyler was learning a lesson that his wealthy parents and expensive lawyers had never been able to teach him. The classroom remained completely silent as everyone absorbed what they had just witnessed and heard. The most feared bully in the school had been completely defeated by a substitute teacher who had barely raised his voice or shown any anger. It was a lesson in respect, humility, and consequences that none of them would ever forget. Marcus Williams stood over Tyler Jensen and began to demonstrate exactly why the teenager had made such a serious mistake in threatening him with a weapon. Without ever raising his voice or showing anger, Marcus used his decades of martial arts training to teach Tyler a lesson about power, respect, and consequences that no amount of money or expensive lawyers could undo. Every movement Marcus made was precise and controlled, designed to educate rather than to cause permanent harm. Tyler tried desperately to break free from the chair and fight back against Marcus, but found that his body would not obey his commands. Every time he attempted to stand up or swing his arms, Marcus would apply gentle pressure to specific points on Tyler's body that would instantly stop his movements. It was like being controlled by invisible strings, with Marcus as the puppet master who decided what Tyler could and could not do. The other students watched in fascination as Marcus explained what he was doing while he did it. He showed them how pressure applied to certain nerve clusters could temporarily disable someone's ability to use their arms or legs. He demonstrated how a light touch to the right spot on the neck could make someone dizzy and confused. All of these techniques were designed by ancient martial artists to stop attackers without causing the kind of injuries that would leave permanent damage. Tyler's face was now red with embarrassment and frustration as he realized that everyone in the classroom was seeing him completely helpless and defeated. For years, he had built his reputation on being the toughest and most dangerous student at Lincoln High School. Other kids feared him, teachers avoided confronting him, and even adults in the community knew to stay out of his way. But now he was sitting in a chair, unable to move, while a substitute teacher calmly explained martial arts techniques to a room full of teenagers with cameras. Marcus walked over to where Tyler's switchblade had fallen and picked it up carefully by the handle. He examined the weapon and explained to the class how dangerous and illegal it was for anyone to bring such a thing into a school. He talked about how many young people had been seriously injured or killed because someone thought a knife would solve their problems. The blade that had seemed so threatening just minutes before now looked small and pathetic in Marcus's experienced hands. With Tyler still unable to move properly, Marcus walked to the classroom phone and called the main office. His voice was calm and professional as he explained the situation to the principal and requested that security and the police be sent to his classroom immediately. He gave a clear and detailed account of what had happened, making sure to mention that Tyler had threatened him with a deadly weapon in front of multiple witnesses who had recorded the entire incident. Tyler tried to speak and protest, but his voice was still not working correctly due to the pressure points that Marcus had activated. He could only make weak, gasping sounds as he listened to Marcus describe the situation to the authorities. For the first time in his life, Tyler was facing consequences that his parents' money and connections might not be able to make disappear. Threatening a teacher with a knife was a serious crime that could result in real jail time. The students in the classroom were sharing the videos they had recorded with their friends through social media and text messages. Within minutes, the footage was spreading throughout Lincoln High School and beyond. Everyone wanted to see the moment when Tyler Jensen, the school's most feared bully, was completely defeated by a substitute teacher who turned out to be a martial arts grandmaster. The video showed Tyler pulling the knife, Marcus disarming him instantly, and then controlling him like he was a small child. Marcus continued to keep Tyler in the chair while they waited for help to arrive, but he also began talking to the rest of the class about making better choices in life. He explained that real strength came from disciplined self-control and using your abilities to help others rather than to hurt them. He talked about how Tyler could have used his intelligence and natural leadership abilities to make positive changes at the school instead of terrorizing other students. As they waited, Marcus also made sure that Tyler understood the seriousness of what he had done. Bringing a weapon to school and threatening a teacher were felony crimes that could result in years in prison. Tyler's juvenile record and history of violence would make it difficult for even the best lawyers to get him out of serious trouble this time. The days when Tyler could do whatever he wanted without facing real consequences were finally coming to an end. The classroom door opened, and 2 security guards entered, followed by 3 police officers who had been called to the school. They looked around the room and saw Tyler sitting helplessly in the chair, while Marcus stood calmly nearby holding the confiscated switchblade. The contrast between the calm substitute teacher and the defeated bully told the whole story without anyone having to say a word. Marcus handed the knife to one of the police officers and began giving his statement about what had happened. His account was clear, detailed, and professional, showing the kind of experience that comes from dealing with law enforcement many times over the years. Tyler Jensen's reign of terror at Lincoln High School was finally over. The police officers who arrived at Marcus Williams' classroom were experienced professionals who had dealt with school violence many times before, but even they were impressed by what they found. Tyler Jensen sat in his chair, still unable to move properly, while Marcus stood nearby looking as calm and composed as if he had just finished teaching a normal history lesson. The confiscated switchblade lay on the teacher's desk as evidence of how serious the situation had been just minutes earlier. Officer Martinez, who was the senior policeman on the scene, began taking statements from Marcus and the students who had witnessed everything. As Marcus explained what had happened, Officer Martinez realized that this was not a typical case of a teacher being threatened by a student. The substitute teacher's calm professional manner and detailed knowledge of proper procedures suggested someone with extensive experience dealing with law enforcement and dangerous situations. While the police were interviewing witnesses, Tyler's feeling and movement began to slowly return as the pressure point effects wore off. He tried to stand up and protest his innocence, but Officer Martinez quickly handcuffed him and read him his rights. Tyler demanded to call his parents and their lawyers, but the officer explained that threatening a teacher with a deadly weapon was a serious felony that would not be easily dismissed regardless of how much money his family had. The students who had recorded the incident were more than happy to share their videos with the police as evidence. The footage clearly showed Tyler pulling the knife, threatening Marcus, and then being instantly and completely disabled by the substitute teacher's martial arts skills. There was no question about what had happened or who was at fault. Tyler's own actions had been captured on multiple cameras from different angles, providing undeniable proof of his crimes. Principal Johnson arrived at the classroom looking stressed and worried about the situation, but also curious about how her substitute teacher had handled such a dangerous confrontation so expertly. She had been expecting to find someone injured or worse, but instead found Tyler in handcuffs and Marcus calmly answering questions like a seasoned professional. Something about Marcus Williams was clearly not what it appeared to be on the surface. After Tyler was taken away in the police car, Principal Johnson asked Marcus to come to her office so they could discuss what had happened and figure out how to handle the aftermath. As they walked through the hallways, word was already spreading throughout the school about the incredible confrontation that had taken place in classroom 205. Students and teachers were talking excitedly about how the quiet substitute teacher had turned out to be some kind of martial arts expert. In the principal's office, Marcus provided a more detailed account of his background when Principal Johnson asked how he had been able to handle Tyler so effectively. She listened in amazement as Marcus explained his 30 years of martial arts training, his work with military special forces, and his experience as a professional bodyguard and instructor. She realized that Lincoln High School had accidentally hired someone with qualifications that were far beyond what anyone had expected. Principal Johnson immediately called the district office to report what had happened and to request a full background check on Marcus Williams. Within an hour, she received a call back from the superintendent, who was both shocked and impressed by what the investigation had revealed. Marcus Williams was indeed a legitimate martial arts grandmaster with credentials and references that read like something from an action movie script. The videos of the confrontation began spreading beyond Lincoln High School as students shared them on social media platforms. Within hours, the footage was being viewed by thousands of people who were amazed by the story of the substitute teacher who had defeated a knife-wielding bully with martial arts skills. News reporters began calling the school asking for interviews, and the story started appearing on local television stations and websites. Tyler's parents, Richard and Patricia Jensen, arrived at the police station with their team of expensive lawyers, expecting to quickly resolve the situation like they had done so many times before. But this time was different because the evidence was overwhelming, and the charges were too serious to simply make disappear. Their son had been caught on video threatening a teacher with a knife in front of multiple witnesses, and no amount of money or influence could change those facts. The lawyers explained to the Jensen family that Tyler was facing charges of assault with a deadly weapon, making terrorist threats, and bringing a weapon onto school property. These were felony charges that could result in several years in prison, especially given Tyler's long history of violent behavior and previous arrests. The days when the Jensen family could buy their way out of trouble were finally coming to an end. Meanwhile, back at Lincoln High School, the atmosphere had completely changed from fear and chaos to excitement and hope. Students who had been terrorized by Tyler for years were celebrating his downfall and talking about how amazing it felt to finally see him face real consequences for his actions. Teachers who had been afraid to confront Tyler were walking taller and feeling more confident about maintaining discipline in their classrooms. Marcus Williams had become an instant legend at Lincoln High School, and the story of how he had defeated Tyler Jensen was already being told and retold with growing excitement throughout the community. The quiet substitute teacher who had seemed so ordinary had turned out to be exactly the kind of hero that everyone had been hoping would come along and put an end to Tyler's reign of terror. 3 weeks after the confrontation between Marcus Williams and Tyler Jensen, Lincoln High School had become a completely different place. The fear and tension that had hung over the hallways like a dark cloud for years was finally gone, and students, teachers, and staff were all feeling the positive changes that came from Tyler's removal. The story of the substitute teacher who had defeated the school's most dangerous bully had spread far beyond the local community, and Marcus had become something of a celebrity. Principal Johnson called Marcus into her office on a Friday afternoon to offer him a permanent position as a history teacher at Lincoln High School. She explained that the school board had been so impressed with how he had handled the Tyler situation and with his incredible background that they wanted him to stay permanently. They were also interested in having him help train the security staff and possibly teach self-defense classes to students and faculty members who were interested in learning. Marcus accepted the job offer with gratitude and excitement. He had come to Lincoln High School looking for a peaceful way to spend his retirement years, but had found something much more meaningful. The students in his classes were eager to learn not just about history, but also about the life lessons that came from his years of martial arts training and real-world experience. He felt like he was finally using his skills and knowledge in exactly the way they were meant to be used. Tyler Jensen's legal troubles had only gotten worse as the weeks went by. His expensive lawyers had managed to get him released on bail, but they could not make the serious charges disappear like they had done with his previous arrests. The video evidence was too clear and the crime was too serious for any amount of money or influence to fix. Tyler was facing the real possibility of spending several years in juvenile detention or adult prison, depending on how the court decided to handle his case. The Jensen family was learning that their money and connections had limits when it came to protecting their son from the consequences of his actions. Richard Jensen's law firm was facing questions about their previous handling of Tyler's cases, and several victims of Tyler's past violence were coming forward with their own lawsuits. The family's reputation in the community was being destroyed as people learned more about how they had enabled Tyler's behavior for years. Tyler himself was struggling to adjust to a world where he could no longer intimidate and control other people. The juvenile detention facility where he was staying while awaiting trial was full of other young men who were not impressed by his wealthy background or previous reputation. For the first time in his life, Tyler was just another troubled teenager with no special privileges or protection from the consequences of his choices. As part of his plea agreement, Tyler was eventually required to perform 200 hours of community service and attend anger management classes for 6 months. He was also expelled from Lincoln High School and would have to finish his education at an alternative school for students with behavioral problems. The judge made it clear that any future violent behavior would result in immediate imprisonment without the possibility of early release. Back at Lincoln High School, Marcus Williams was settling into his new role as a permanent teacher and mentor. His classes were always full because students wanted to hear his stories about martial arts training, military work, and the importance of using strength to protect others rather than to hurt them. He taught them that real power came from disciplined self-control and the courage to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult or dangerous. Marcus also started an after-school program where students could learn basic self-defense techniques and martial arts principles. The program was extremely popular, especially among students who had been bullied or who felt unsafe in their daily lives. Marcus taught them not just how to protect themselves physically, but also how to build confidence, avoid dangerous situations, and resolve conflicts without violence whenever possible. The security staff at Lincoln High School also began training with Marcus to learn better techniques for handling dangerous situations without causing unnecessary harm. His expertise in pressure points and non-lethal control methods helped them become more effective at maintaining order while reducing the risk of injuries to students or staff members. The school became a model for other districts that were dealing with similar problems. The video of Marcus defeating Tyler continued to circulate on social media and brought positive attention to Lincoln High School and the importance of having qualified, dedicated teachers in every classroom. Marcus received interview requests from news programs, martial arts magazines, and educational organizations that wanted to hear his story and learn from his experience. But for Marcus, the most rewarding part of his new life was seeing the positive changes in his students. Young people who had been afraid to speak up in class were now participating actively in discussions. Students who had been bullied were walking with more confidence and standing up for themselves and others. The entire school culture was shifting from one based on fear and intimidation to one based on mutual respect and support. Marcus Williams had come to Lincoln High School as a substitute teacher, looking for a quiet way to spend his retirement. Instead, he had found his true calling as an educator, mentor, and protector of young people who needed someone to believe in them and show them a better way forward. The confrontation with Tyler Jensen had been just the beginning of a new chapter in his life that was more fulfilling than anything he had done in his previous career. Tyler's defeat had taught everyone at Lincoln High School an important lesson about courage, justice, and the power of standing up to bullies. But more importantly, it had shown them that heroes sometimes come in unexpected packages, and that real strength is always used to protect others rather than to cause harm.